I'm going to show you how to use the quarters grid to loosely draw your image for painting. This is our reference image with a quarters grid drawn on it. You need a surface that is the same proportion as your reference image with the same kind of grid drawn on it. I've drawn a square and drawn the quarters grid on it. Now I'll begin to loosely lay out the group of apples using light pressure. If you draw too heavily, the graphite will mix with your paint. So here you can see I'm just paying attention to where the edges of the group of apples interact with the grid. I'm not working in the middle of the apples, just working around the outer edge of it to get the whole group laid out first. I'm using very light pressure, and I am using multiple lines around the edge instead of pressing hard and just using one continuous line. That allows me to make corrections more easily and to reposition things without having a heavy line. Once I have the outer edges of the group set in place, I start working inside the group and breaking it down into the individual apples. So I'm working with the apple that's closest to you first, and just lightly laying in its edges, paying attention to how those edges interact with the grid. I also just drew a little shadow that's at the top of that apple. So the back apple, I just drew an indication of where the stem is, a little shadow or highlight on the right. I'm estimating where the horizon line is on both sides. Now I'm looking at the shadows on the foreground, just lightly laying them in, dropping that large shadow on the back left apple and also the highlight on that apple. Don't want to draw your highlights in too heavily because they're going to be light, and you don't want to have dark marks where you want it to be light. Correcting the shape of the apple in the foreground. Point here is to break the apples down into large light, dark, or color areas. There's a shadow on the right side. There's the place where the stem is on that apple. Get a little bit of where the stem is in that yellow spot on the back apple. Shadow on the back apple. Some of the details around the stem dimple, emphasizing that shadow a little more. What I just did there was check whether the apples are, which one is higher. I drew a line across to see which one was higher and which one was lower. Drawing some shadows on the side of that back left apple. Emphasizing the horizon line. Just correcting the shape of the apples a little bit. Looking for places where there is more or less contrast, and I draw a little heavier where there's more. Showing the cast shadow that goes to the right on both of those right apples. Showing that sharp intersection between those two apples. Just getting the top shape of that apple a little bit more specific. Looking at the top plane of that apple. Drawing the stem and some of the shadows and highlights around the stem. Drawing the shadow on the right side of that apple. Correcting the edge of that apple a little bit. Drawing that little shadow there. Emphasizing the highlight. Drawing some of the shapes of the colors and shadows on that back apple. Some of those details around the stem dimple. Looking for the shadows in the foreground, emphasizing them a little more.